Trump's legal exposure growing. Trump world reportedly anxious and prepping for the worst case as more star GOP lawyers admit that Trump will be indicted. Very nervous right now, as he says. The Bush AG calling out Trump for possible charges of seditious conspiracy and obstruction of Congress. And then there is hardcore conservative lawyer Andrew McCarthy, a Fox News legal analyst, who now this in an interview with Mediaite.
He's very aware that you have a mob that's armed to the teeth, that he is planning to encourage to march on the Capitol. That knowledge opens up the possibility that you could prosecute for aiding and abetting the intimidation of federal officials, which is a pretty serious crime.
Do you expect that we're going to see Trump prosecuted by the Justice Department on any of these charges?
I do now, yeah.
I do now. He thinks Trump will be prosecuted, and that would come from the Department of Justice. One NYU law professor telling the New Yorker, quote, "The Attorney General had said he will follow the evidence. I believe him, and I believe there will be an indictment." A former federal prosecutor also saying the testimony we saw this week is a, quote, game changer and could be the, quote, smoking gun. Trump is now on the defense, with the committee alluding to more bombshells coming up, and the American public is reacting. A new poll showing nearly half of Americans, 48%, want to see Trump prosecuted. I have the perfect guest to break this all down with. Former prosecutor Jill Wine-Banks and Guardian reporter Hugo Lowell join me when we're back in just 1 minute. Joining me now is former Watergate prosecutor Jill Wine-Banks and the Guardian reporter Hugo Lowell, who has been all over this story from the start.
And whether he should or shouldn't, I'll leave to other people, but I think it would be horrible not to act on what is now blatantly obvious to anyone who has watched the hearings. My favorite crime would be 2383, not the seditious conspiracy, which is 2384. And the reason is that the penalty for 2383 is not just jail. It is being barred from ever holding federal office again. And for me, that would be a more important goal than jailing the former president. But there is, of course, as you mentioned, obstruction of Congress, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, so many things just based on Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony, just hers for those few hours, laid out all of those crimes. And then you have many more besides that.
I think the Select Committee is very confident in what Cassidy testified in, and they think it only bolsters their case. And of course, they previously said they believe Trump conspired to fool the United States and obstructed an official proceeding.
Earlier this week, and here's the quote from him, "Even if Trump truly believed there had been election fraud, he wasn't entitled to unleash a mob on the Capitol or to intimidate his vice president or Congress into violating their legal duties or to have phony electoral certificates sent to Washington. His irrational belief that the election outcome was wrong would not negate his criminal intent." Do you agree, Jill, with that assessment by George Conway? Because again, intent is a critical part of any prosecution by the DOJ.
Intent is important, but I agree with George Conway. First of all, I think intent has been proven now beyond a reasonable doubt. There is also the willful ignorance standard, which is clearly satisfied here. You cannot just bury your head in the sand and say, I don't like what I'm hearing, so I'm going to ignore it. But I think just, again, Cassidy Hutchinson laid out that he knew the crowd was armed, he knew they were dangerous, but he knew they wouldn't hurt him. They knew he might hurt someone, but he didn't care. And he said to them, go to the Capitol, march and fight like hell. That is enough for me to be in violation of the elements of 2383 to bar him from office. So I think he should be indicted for that. I think that he could be. I think it would be very hard for the Department of Justice, having loved my tenure there. I know that we looked at the facts, we looked at the law, and we would then act on it. And it would be very hard to not take action based on what we've seen publicly. And I have to assume that the Department of Justice has more than that, and that if they don't already, they will get it very soon as the hearings wrap up and they give them all of the testimony that they already have. So I think that they will have to act on it, and that it's not just wishful thinking anymore, that it is accountability that is necessary to prevent a future recurrence of this, either by, if he is nominated, by him doing it again, or by someone else who thinks that he's doing a great job and gets nominated instead of him doing the same thing. We can't afford it in a democracy. Our vote has to count, and it has to be counted as we cast it. So the kind of obstruction he engaged in needs to be stopped, and that's why we need an indictment.
Hugo, there was a lot of noise after Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony about whether or not Donald Trump, with his little hands, could reach in the SUV and the Beast to, attack the Secret Service agent. It's all noise, right? Because the issue, as we heard from Jill, is he knew these were armed supporters. They were marching in the Capitol. He told them to go. He didn't make them stand down, even when they were also threatening Mike Pence. We are supposed to hear in the upcoming public hearings that are maybe starting in mid-July, Hugo, about the Oath Keepers, about the Proud Boys and the connection. We also heard from Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony that Mark Meadows was going to go to the Willard Hotel, to the War Room for Steve Bannon on January 5th, the day before the insurrection, to be with Roger Stone and to meet with Mike Flynn. So Hugo, again, what are you hearing about what we are going to be learning from the 1-6 committee as these hearings resume mid-July, and how that could possibly tie in Donald Trump and his knowledge about the fact these were going to be armed insurrectionists?
I mean, I can tell you that the Select Committee was surprised when they learned that Trump told Meadows to call up Roger Stone and Michael Flynn. That was information that they had not previously had. And the other point was, of course, that Meadows wanted to go to the Willard himself and, discuss strategies for January 6th in person at the Trump War Room. But the interesting element here is definitely the Mike Flynn and the Roger Stone connections. Roger Stone, of course, has ties to the Proud Boys. Mike Flynn has ties to the Oath Keepers when they moved together. His Praetorian Guard, his First Amendment Praetorian security detail, worked with the Oath Keepers. There's a lot of crossover connection here. And what Cassidy Hutchinson revealed, and I expect the Select Committee to build upon, is that there is now a connection from the White House through the president to these groups. And that is something that we had not heard before, and I think is a very significant point that Jamie Raskin, when he convenes his hearing, is going to get into.
Jill Wine-Banks and Hugo Lowell, my friends, thank you for being here this evening. I appreciate it. Coming up ahead,